So really quickly before we get the video started, I was streaming yesterday and something crazy happened. King of the fourth quarter came through with an absolutely massive raid. I've talked to the guy a few times on Twitter, but I don't really know him super well. And the fact that he came through and brought all of his viewers from Twitch over to my stream made yesterday such an incredible day. And huge shout out to Kenny, man. Like, that was an unbelievable thing that he did yesterday, and I couldn't be more thankful. Anyway, welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and in today's video, we're talking about a handful of really interesting possible trade candidates for this offseason in the NBA, because I think really often we get kind of stuck on the same names over and over again, where we're talking about some of the bigger names. We're talking about the possibility that the Golden State Warriors make a move for a star, that they trade the second overall pick, the possibility that the Timberwolves trade the first overall pick, or Bradley Beal trade. But there's four guys that I think are really interesting candidates this offseason that could have a significant impact around the league if they are moved. And the reason I think it's important to point these out is because people in general are a little bit down on this offseason. Maybe the draft isn't as exciting, free agency isn't as exciting, but the NBA almost always delivers when it comes to crazy things happening. And I think these guys could be involved in some of those crazy things. Quickly though, speaking of that #1 overall pick, this week's trade machine, I just tweeted it out. You can leave your suggestions down here in the comment section below as well. This week's trade machine is on the #1 overall pick in the draft, which I think is going to be kind of an interesting twist. So if you have trade suggestions for that, that is going to be this week's NBA trade machine. But really quickly before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, then consider subscribing. I upload basically every single day as often as I can, and leaving a like rating is a great way to let me know that you're enjoying the content, and it helps out the videos a ton as well. And as I mentioned in that intro, I have been streaming on Twitch consistently. I stream at least 5 times a week, and it's been super fun to continue to grow that platform. So if you haven't come over to the stream to check it out, you should definitely do so at twitch.tv/spolo_TD. I'm probably live right now, and it'd be super cool if you come over and say hi. Anyway, with that said, let's go and get started. Okay, so first up on the list is a player that out of anybody on this list, I'm probably rooting the most for to be traded, just because I want to see this guy in a different scenario, and it's Rudy Gobert. And it's not that I think that Rudy Gobert is a bad player. I just want to fully understand where he stands and what the hierarchy is when it comes to Rudy Gobert, because for some people, he is a incredibly impactful defensive player, a defensive player of the year caliber guy. Obviously, he's won the award in the past, that provides some pretty good offensive value on the boards and finishing inside and things like that. While for other people, Rudy Gobert doesn't really do anything for them at all, and they don't think that he's an impactful player on the offensive end. And defensively, yeah, he's fine during the regular season, but then he gets exposed in the postseason. And really, I just want to see where we're at with this guy. And the way to do that, I think, is to see him potentially on a different team. And here's the reason behind why he could possibly be moved from Utah. It's really just a money thing at this point. And I think everybody agrees that at a certain level, Rudy Gobert is a valuable player, right? In terms of what he does on the defensive end. But it's about how much you would have to pay for that value, and specifically Utah, because he is going to be eligible for a Supermax extension. Now, they don't have to pay him that, and he can certainly go somewhere else. But the idea that they could possibly trade Gobert and get value for him rather than paying him $30+ million a year next offseason is an idea that I think should at least be considered in Utah, and I'd be really interested to see what would happen with them. Now, some possible teams for me to take a look at is potentially making this move. I still really love the Boston fit. I think there's a world in which you can do like a Gordon Hayward plus some picks in exchange for Gobert thing. And I understand that's weird because of Hayward returning to Utah and things like that. From a basketball standpoint, I think there's a move to be made there. And there are other teams like the Warriors, for example, that have assets and have a need at the 5 spot. And I think either of those two teams would be able to make it work with Rudy Gobert, and they'd be able to figure out a way to make sure that his weaknesses are minimized in the postseason, and you maximize all the great stuff that he does defensively. Like, imagine Rudy Gobert in Boston, with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum on the wings and Marcus Smart on the wings. That would be a really incredible defensive team. And if they only had to give up Hayward and a couple of picks, I think that would be something worth taking a look at. Now, for Utah, even with the money stuff, is it likely that they trade Gobert? I don't know. I think they're at least interested in the idea. I don't know if they'd actually go through with it, because then what do you do with the 5 spot? It's not like they have a number of good long-term options there. So maybe they're trying to get someone in exchange for Gobert at the 5 that they don't have to pay as much, and then they can also get some other assets as well. I don't know. Utah's in an interesting spot when it comes to their money. They're going to have to pay Donovan Mitchell and Gobert pretty soon, and I wouldn't be surprised if they at least kick the tires on a possible Gobert trade. Okay, next up now is a player that we've talked about this offseason already. He was the first player put in an NBA trade machine for this offseason, and it's Buddy Hield. He's another guy that potentially I could see in Boston, but I think that we're undervaluing Buddy Hield a little bit. And I understand that the contract maybe isn't great for a guy that for the second half of the year was coming off the bench in Sacramento. But I think he's certainly unhappy there. I think he certainly does want to leave, and I think that he does have value around the league as one of the best shooters in the league. Like, that's not hyperbole to say that Buddy Hield is one of the best long-range shooters in the entire league and can do some other stuff as well, playmaking-wise. He's not going to be great defensively. Maybe he's a little bit older than you think that he is, but he can certainly help a team that needs a little bit of help on the offensive end of the floor. And I think there's moves to be made there, potentially to somewhere like Orlando, potentially to somewhere like Brooklyn, if they wanted to go with the third quote-unquote star role for Buddy Hield. I think that, again, if we're talking about interesting trade candidates, they don't get much more interesting for me in terms of realistic trades than Buddy Hield. In terms of what Sacramento could expect in return, it depends. It depends on what they want to do. It depends on what their prerogative is. It seems like right now they're prioritizing bringing back Bogdanovic over Buddy Hield this offseason. Not that they have to re-sign Hield, but if they bring back Bogdanovic, their cap numbers are going to be super out of whack, and they're probably going to look to move Hield. And so it's one of those things where, like, you want to build around De'Aaron Fox and Bogdanovic and Bagley, but do you think that you have enough right now to trade Hield for other players that can help you now? Are you playing for the future? And then how does that impact your cap stuff once you have to pay Fox and Bagley, assuming they're both still good by the time that their contracts run out? There's a lot of things to juggle here. And so I think that's really what holds me back from thinking that he might actually be moved, is what exactly Sacramento would want in return and what would cause them to actually pull the trigger on a Hield deal. But he's certainly unhappy. There's certainly the possibility there for a trade, and I would be really interested, just like Gobert, in seeing Hield in a different environment and seeing if it's a Sacramento problem in terms of his unhappiness or if it's just a Buddy Hield problem, and that's just, you know, the way it's going to be for him, and he's just not going to be happy in whatever role in which he's not, you know, like the guy. So I do think that there's a little bit of undervaluing there. Buddy Hield, legitimately one of the best shooters in the entire league. And I would be interested in seeing him somewhere like Orlando or Brooklyn or potentially Boston as well. And then last up, there's two guys kind of combined in this entry, and it's DeMar Derozan and Lamarcus Aldridge. And we've talked about them a few times in the last couple of Trade Machine videos. And for the Spurs, like, everything just depends on Popovich. Like, it really seems like as long as he's there, they're not going to fully, quote unquote, rebuild. But both of these guys still have value. I mean, Derozan and Aldridge are both expiring contracts. They're both going to be 2021 free agents. And when you're looking objectively at this Spurs roster, there's not anything crazy going on in this roster. Like, yeah, they've got some nice pieces, but, you know, unless they hit a home run in this lottery, they're going to be looking at a pretty significant, not necessarily a rebuild, because that's just not really how they operate, but it's going to be a while before they're like a top tier competitive team in the Western Conference again. And with that in mind, the value on Derozan and Aldridge, not only his expiring contracts, but his players, is never going to be higher than it is right now. And if there's some kind of surprise retirement from Popovich, or if somehow they do, you know, take a turn towards a bit of a rebuild even with him still there, or if they're looking to get some veteran players that are maybe, you know, signed long-term or on some smaller deals or whatever, I think these are interesting candidates. When you're looking at expiring contracts, and if it wasn't the Spurs and if it wasn't Popovich, I think they'd be even more interesting and even more likely to be moved. But as long as Popovich is still there, you never really know with this Spurs team. But I mean, Derozan can still be a guy that can score, can play make for you. His fit as like a second or third guy is still really questionable because of the inability for him to shoot off the ball. But then Aldridge is another guy that can punish small ball lineups, can score in the post, isn't going to be great defensively, but can really space the floor as well, whether that's from the mid-range, or I still think he has the ability to make threes as well, even though that hasn't been something that he's showcased lately in San Antonio. And I think those are just two guys that we kind of forget about as possible trade players that are really talented and are still good players. They're just, I don't want to say stuck in San Antonio, but we just kind of forget about them right now because the Spurs aren't really the Spurs right now. So we'll kind of see what happens with Popovich. We'll see what that front office wants to do. I think if it was any other team, they probably would have already explored the possibility of moving either of these two guys and getting something in return for them. But I think it's possible that at some point this offseason, that tide starts to shift towards moving one of these two guys. And if that is the case, I think there would be some really, really interesting trades potentially on the table, because I think teams could get these two guys for relatively low value, considering expiring contracts and things like that. If the Spurs did want to move them and go into a bit of a rebuild, they could, you know, maybe get some picks or a young player or something in exchange for guys that at times are borderline all-star caliber players, or maybe even all-star caliber players just straight up. So two more interesting players to keep an eye on there. And yeah, there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, like, I can't thank Kenny enough for what just completely made my Sunday yesterday. My Panthers lost, and I was like, we'll hop on stream, we'll play some games. And he that was an awesome thing that he did yesterday. And again, if you guys want to come check me out on Twitch, I'm probably streaming right now. And again, as well, another reminder, the NBA trade machine for this week is going to be on the #1 overall pick in the 2020 NBA draft. A little bit different, but I'm still interested to see kind of what you guys come up with. You can leave those down in the comment section below and over on Twitter as well if you'd like to. And yeah, that's kind of what we have coming up this week. But that's going to be the end of today's video. As I said, thank you guys so much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.